A respected doctor's refusal to treat a patient wearing a MAGA hat spirals into a public showdown when video footage exposes his discriminatory actions. As the community divides and tensions rise, one man's stand against medical prejudice forces everyone to confront an uncomfortable truth about political bias in healthcare. A doctor's oath to do no harm met its match in a red MAGA hat on what should have been an ordinary Wednesday morning at Maple Grove Medical Clinic. Robert Thompson shifted uncomfortably in the waiting room chair, his shoulder pain flaring as he adjusted his position. At 54, he was used to the occasional aches that came with running his hardware store, but this persistent pain had finally driven him to seek medical help. The waiting room buzzed with typical morning activity. Mothers with sniffling children, elderly patients leafing through outdated magazines, and the steady click of the receptionist's keyboard. His MAGA hat, still fresh from last week's rally, sat proudly on his head. Robert had worn it partly out of habit, partly out of principle. His father, a Vietnam veteran who'd taught him the value of standing up for what you believe in, would have done the same. Dr. James Chen stood at the nurse's station, flipping through patient charts with growing irritation. His eyes kept darting to Robert through the glass partition, his jaw visibly clenching each time he caught sight of the red hat. At 28, Dr. Chen was the newest addition to the clinic's staff, his medical degree still fresh enough that you could practically smell the ink. "I can't believe they let people like that in here," Dr. Chen muttered to Sarah, the head nurse, loud enough that several patients looked up from their phones. "Did you see what he's wearing?" Sarah shifted uncomfortably, glancing at the security camera in the corner. "Doctor?" "Chen, he's next on the schedule. His paperwork's all in order." "Well, I'm not comfortable treating him," Dr. Chen announced, dropping Robert's file on the counter with a sharp snap. "These Trump supporters are everything that's wrong with this country. They're basically walking biohazards." Several patients had already pulled out their phones, sensing the brewing confrontation. Robert sat straighter in his chair, his face calm but alert, as he watched Dr. Chen's increasingly agitated movements through the glass. The young doctor's voice carried clearly through the now silent waiting room as he continued his tirade. "I went to medical school to help people who deserve it," Dr. Chen declared, his voice rising. "Not to enable these racist, science-denying—" "Doctor," Sarah interrupted sharply. "Mr. Thompson can hear you." Sarah's warning came too late. Robert rose from his chair, medical paperwork in hand, and approached the nurse's station with measured steps. The waiting room had gone completely silent, phones raised like digital sentinels recording every moment. "I believe I'm next," Robert said quietly, placing his paperwork on the counter. His shoulder twinged as he moved, but his face remained composed. Dr. Chen's nostrils flared at Robert's proximity. "I don't treat people who support fascism," he spat, gesturing at the MAGA hat. "Find another doctor who shares your medieval worldview." Robert pulled out his phone and began recording. "Doctor, I'm here for medical treatment. My political beliefs shouldn't matter. Everything is political." Dr. Chen's voice rose sharply. "Your kind voted against health care reform. You probably think horse dewormer cures COVID too, right?" He let out a harsh laugh. "I doubt you'd even understand modern medical terminology." Sarah, the nurse, shifted uncomfortably beside them. "Dr. Chen, please." "No, Sarah. I won't examine someone who's actively working to destroy our healthcare system." Dr. Chen crossed his arms. "Remove the hat, or leave." Robert kept his phone steady, documenting every word. "I'd like written documentation of your refusal to treat me, please. And I remind you of your Hippocratic oath. Don't lecture me about medical ethics while wearing that symbol of oppression." Dr. Chen's face had turned red. "You Trump supporters caused this healthcare crisis. Your ignorance is literally killing people." More patients had gathered near the nurse's station, some filming, others whispering among themselves. Through the growing crowd, Robert spotted Mrs. Martinez, a regular customer from his hardware store, shaking her head in disapproval at the doctor's behavior. "I'm not leaving until I receive official documentation of this refusal of treatment," Robert stated firmly. "And I'd like the clinic administrator's contact information." "Doctor?" Chen slammed his hand on the counter. "Security! We need to remove this patient!" His voice cracked with anger. "I will not be forced to treat someone who supports policies that harm my community." The security guard, Dave Wilson, approached slowly, his body camera clearly visible. He'd worked at Robert's hardware store part-time during college and knew him well. "Everything all right here?" he asked, positioning himself carefully in view of the security cameras. "This man is refusing to leave after I declined treatment," Dr. Chen said, straightening his coat with shaking hands. "Because of my political beliefs," Robert added calmly, still recording. Despite having a scheduled appointment and being in severe pain. The waiting room had become a sea of phones, all capturing Dr. Chen's increasingly agitated state as he launched into another tirade about Republican voters and health care policy. Robert stood quietly, pain evident in his stance, but determination clear in his eyes, as the young doctor's professional demeanor crumbled with each passing moment. The tension in the clinic waiting room crackled as more patients pulled out their phones. Mrs. Henderson, a silver-haired woman in her 70s, struggled to her feet using her cane. "I've been coming to this clinic for 20 years, she announced, her voice wavering but clear. "Never have I seen such unprofessional behavior from a doctor." Dr. Chen whirled to face her. "You don't understand what's at stake here. These people vote for policies that hurt patients like you." "The only person hurting patients right now is you, doctor," Mrs. Henderson replied firmly. Sarah, the nurse, had slipped behind the counter and was speaking urgently into a phone, her eyes darting between Dr. Chen and Robert. Through the glass doors, Robert could see more patients arriving, stopping short at the scene unfolding inside. A young mother with 2 children pressed record on her phone as she entered, positioning herself near the wall. "I'm calling the medical board right now," Robert said, pulling out a second phone while keeping his first one recording. His shoulder throbbed, but he maintained his composure. Would anyone who witnessed this incident be willing to provide their contact information? Several hands went up. Dr. Chen's face contorted with rage. "You're all being manipulated. Can't you see what these people represent?" He jabbed a finger toward Robert's hat. "They're destroying our healthcare system." "The only destruction I'm seeing is of your medical career," came a gravelly voice from the doorway. Dr. Matthews, the senior physician, stood there with the clinic administrator, Ms. Rodriguez, both wearing expressions of deep concern. "This man is wearing a symbol of hate," Dr. Chen protested, but his voice had lost some of its conviction. "What I'm wearing is irrelevant," Robert stated, switching to speakerphone as the medical board line connected. "What matters is that you're violating multiple laws regarding medical discrimination." The waiting room had transformed into an impromptu courtroom, with patients on both sides documenting every word. A local news van pulled into the parking lot, visible through the clinic's front windows. Several patients were already posting videos to social media, their comments creating a ripple effect through the community. "Dr. Chen," Ms. Rodriguez stepped forward, her clipboard clutched tightly. "Please step into my office immediately." "This is bigger than one patient, doctor." Chen's voice rose desperately. "We have to take a stand against—" "The only stand being taken," Dr. Matthews interrupted, "is against discrimination in medical care. Security, please escort Dr. Chen to administration." Dave, the security guard, moved forward, his body camera still recording. "Sir, please come with me." Robert's phone buzzed with notifications as the first video clips began circulating. Local conservative radio host Mark Thompson had already picked up the story, his listeners calling the clinic in growing numbers. Through the windows, more news vans were pulling into the parking lot, their satellite dishes extending skyward like mechanical flowers seeking sunlight. As Robert disconnected from the medical board call, his phone lit up with a stream of notifications. The video clips were spreading like wildfire across local Facebook groups and Twitter. One particular angle, shot by the young mother near the wall, captured Dr. Chen's tirade in crystal-clear detail, including his declaration about refusing care based on political beliefs. Mr. Thompson, Ms. Rodriguez approached, her professional demeanor strained but intact. We'd like to speak with you about filing a formal incident report. We're taking this matter extremely seriously. Through the clinic windows, Robert could see reporters setting up their equipment. Sarah, the nurse who had called administration earlier, approached with an ice pack for his shoulder. I've documented your vitals and Dr. Chen's refusal of care in the system, she said quietly. Just so you know, several staff members are willing to provide statements. The clinic's phones were ringing non-stop now. Another staff member hurried past, mentioning that the State Medical Association was on line 3. Robert's own phone buzzed with a text from Mark Thompson, the conservative radio host. Story going live in 10. Multiple patients contacting station with similar experiences from Dr. Chen. Dr. Matthews pulled up Dr. Chen's social media history on a computer at the nurse's station, his face growing grimmer by the minute. Look at this, he muttered to Ms. Rodriguez. 6 months of posts about refusing to treat Republicans. He's been building to this. The clinic's waiting room had transformed into an impromptu command center. Some patients were giving interviews through the windows to reporters outside, while others shared their own experiences with Dr. Chen's political bias. Mrs. Henderson had settled into her chair again, holding court with a small group of longtime patients who were calling the clinic's board members. My daughter's a civil rights attorney, offered a middle-aged man in a business suit, handing Robert a card. This is textbook discrimination. She'll want to talk to you. Outside, the first protesters were arriving, a mix of local Republican groups with hastily made signs about medical discrimination. They were soon met by counter-protesters defending Dr. Chen, their competing chants creating a mounting tension in the parking lot. Robert's phone buzzed again, this time with a message from the state's medical ethics board requesting an urgent interview. On his social media feed, he could see Dr. Chen's supporters attempting to paint him as the aggressor, but their arguments were quickly overwhelmed by the growing number of video angles showing the doctor's unprovoked outburst. The clinic's legal team is on their way, Ms. Rodriguez announced, returning from her office. And Dr. Chen? She paused, glancing at the security footage playing on her tablet, has just posted another statement doubling down on his position. He's claiming it's his moral duty to refuse treatment to certain political affiliations. The tension in the air was electric as more news vans arrived and phone cameras continued recording. This had moved beyond a simple medical incident. It was becoming a flashpoint in a larger cultural battle about discrimination and professional ethics. Within hours, local news station had dispatched their lead medical reporter to the scene. Sarah Jenkins, the veteran journalist, stood before the growing crowd, her microphone raised as she delivered her live report. Behind me, you can see both supporters and protesters gathering outside Riverside Medical Center, where earlier today, Dr. Mao James Chen allegedly refused treatment to a patient wearing political attire. The Minnesota Medical Association's statement appeared on screens across the waiting room. We are deeply concerned by reports of patient discrimination based on political affiliation. Such actions, if verified, represent a serious breach of medical ethics and professional conduct. Robert watched as Dr. Matthews printed another stack of witness statements. That's 17 now, he said, organizing the papers, all describing similar incidents with Dr. Chen over the past year. The hospital's administrative director, Barbara Wells, emerged from her office, her face drawn with concern. "The board has placed Dr. Chen on paid administrative leave," she announced to the staff. "We're implementing emergency ethics training for all departments, effective immediately." Outside, the division grew more visible. A group of medical students from the University of Minnesota, wearing white coats, had assembled with signs reading, "Healthcare is political," and "Stand with Dr. Chen." They were outnumbered by a larger group of community members demanding accountability, their voices rising in organized chants about medical discrimination. Robert's civil rights attorney, Patricia Martinez, arrived with a thick folder under her arm. "The pattern is clear," she said, spreading screenshots across the conference room table. "Look at these tweets from Dr. Chen's personal account. Conservative patients should find doctors who share their values. Maybe they shouldn't get health care if they vote against it." Some dating back 3 years. The clinic's phones continued ringing as patients called to cancel appointments. MSIS. Rodriguez updated her clipboard. 37 cancellations since morning, with more coming in. The hospital's online rating had plummeted as reviews poured in, many from previous patients sharing their own experiences of political bias. A nurse practitioner from the cardiology department approached Robert, speaking in hushed tones. "I reported him last year when he made comments about delaying care for patients with conservative bumper stickers. Nothing came of it then, but I still have the emails." The local medical community began taking sides. Dr. Sarah Walsh, chief of surgery at Metropolitan General, released a statement distancing herself and her department from Dr. Chen's actions. "Political beliefs have no place in determining patient care. Period." As evening approached, the hospital's security team had to establish a perimeter to separate the growing crowds. Local police arrived to maintain order as tensions rose between the opposing groups. Inside, Robert met with the hospital's ethics committee, providing them with his detailed account and the growing collection of video evidence. A town hall meeting was hastily scheduled for the following evening at the community center. The mayor's office released a statement calling for calm, while promising a thorough investigation into allegations of systemic political discrimination in healthcare delivery. The town hall meeting room buzzed with tension as Robert entered, finding it already packed beyond capacity. Local news cameras lined the back wall, their red lights blinking in anticipation. Dr. Matthews approached him with a thick manila folder. The state board just expedited their investigation. They've uncovered 7 formal complaints against Dr. Chen in the past 18 months, all from patients with conservative political affiliations. The hospital's internal investigation had unearthed more troubling evidence. A nurse named Tracy Wilson had come forward with documentation of Dr. Chen's patient screening system, a coded notation he used to mark charts of patients he identified as Republicans. He would write PC for political concern in the corner of their files, she explained to the ethics committee. Those patients consistently faced longer wait times and received shorter consultations. Social media continued to amplify the controversy. Screenshots of Dr. Chen's Twitter history revealed a disturbing pattern. Just had another MAGA patient demand antibiotics for a viral infection. Maybe natural selection will solve this problem. The tweet had garnered hundreds of likes from fellow medical professionals, raising concerns about broader political bias in healthcare. Robert's attorney, Patricia Martinez, presented her findings to the hospital board. "We've documented 32 cases where Dr. Chen provided demonstrably different standards of care based on perceived political affiliations. This isn't just about one incident. It's systematic discrimination." The medical community's response grew increasingly divided. Dr. Lisa Chen, no relation to James, stood before her colleagues at the emergency staff meeting. "We took an oath to treat all patients equally. Political beliefs have no place in medical decisions." Her statement was met with both applause and visible discomfort from various staff members. Outside the hospital, the protests had grown. A group of medical students held signs reading, "Healthcare is political," while counter-protesters displayed photos of the Hippocratic Oath. Local police established barricades to separate the groups as tensions mounted. The state medical board accelerated their investigation, assigning senior investigator Marcus Thompson to the case. "We're reviewing every patient interaction Dr. Chen has had in the past 3 years," Thompson announced. "Our preliminary findings suggest a consistent pattern of politically motivated care decisions." Barbara Wells, the hospital administrator, faced mounting pressure from both sides. Major insurance providers had begun inquiring about potential discrimination in care delivery, threatening to review their contracts. The hospital's legal team worked through the night, documenting each new revelation and its potential implications. Dr. Matthews discovered more disturbing evidence in the clinic's scheduling system. "Look at these appointment times," he showed Robert. Conservative-identified patients were consistently scheduled at the end of the day, often double-booked, leading to extended wait times. This wasn't random, it was deliberate. The local medical association called an emergency meeting to address the growing crisis. Dr. Sarah Walsh presented data showing how political discrimination in healthcare could impact patient outcomes. When patients feel judged or unwelcome, they delay seeking care. This has real, measurable health consequences. The investigation took another dramatic turn when Dr. Chen's former medical assistant, Michael Rivera, submitted a sworn affidavit detailing the doctor's systematic screening process. He created a checklist of what he called red flags, things like American flag pins, certain bumper stickers in the parking lot, or casual mentions of conservative views during intake. These patients were flagged for what he termed specialized handling. The hospital's IT department recovered deleted emails showing Dr. Chen had coordinated with several like-minded colleagues to share his screening methods. "Finally figured out a way to weed out the deplorables without technically violating policy," one email read. "Happy to share my system over coffee." The timestamp showed it was sent just 3 months before Robert's incident. Robert sat in Dr. Matthews's office, reviewing security footage from the clinic's waiting room. The videos showed a clear pattern. Patients with visible conservative identifiers consistently received different treatment. In one clip, a woman wearing a Back the Blue t-shirt waited for 3 hours while other patients who arrived later were called back ahead of her. "The scope of this is staggering," Dr. Matthews said, shuffling through patient testimonials. "We've identified over 40 cases where treatment was delayed or altered based on perceived political alignment. Some patients were even referred to other providers with vague notes about poor patient fit." The state medical board's investigation expanded to include Dr. Chen's residency records. They discovered concerning journal entries from his training years. "Medical school teaches us to treat everyone equally, but some ideologies are inherently harmful to public health. Don't we have a duty to prioritize those who follow science over politics?" Local news stations began running special reports on healthcare discrimination. Reporter Sarah Chen, again no relation, interviewed affected patients. "I mentioned attending a Republican fundraiser during my consultation," one elderly woman recalled, fighting tears. "Suddenly, my chronic pain wasn't severe enough to warrant the treatment we'd previously discussed." The hospital's legal department worked overtime processing the mounting evidence. Barbara Wells called an emergency board meeting after discovering that Dr. Chen had created an unofficial network of politically aligned providers. "They called it conscious healthcare routing," she explained to the board. Essentially, they were building a shadow system to filter patients based on political beliefs. Robert maintained his composure through it all, even as the story gained national attention. "This isn't about politics anymore," he told Dr. Matthews. It's about the fundamental right to receive medical care without ideological discrimination. His words resonated with healthcare workers across the country, prompting similar investigations at other facilities. The nurses' union found itself deeply divided. Some defended Dr. Chen's right to screen patients, while others, like Nurse Wilson, stood firm on medical ethics. "The moment we start choosing who deserves care based on their politics," she declared at a staff meeting, "we've betrayed everything our profession stands for." As evidence mounted, the hospital's ethics committee convened an emergency session to review Dr. Chen's patient records. Dr. Sarah Martinez, head of the committee, spread dozens of files across the conference room table. "We've identified a disturbing pattern dating back 3 years," she explained, pointing to highlighted sections. Patients with conservative indicators experienced wait times averaging 83% longer than other patients. The state medical board's investigator, James Cooper, arrived to conduct interviews with hospital staff. His preliminary findings painted a troubling picture of institutional complicity. Several administrators were aware of Dr. Chen's screening methods, but chose not to intervene, Cooper noted in his report. Some even helped develop codes in the scheduling system to flag certain patients. Social media researchers uncovered a trail of Dr. Chen's online posts that further damaged his credibility. Healthcare workers have a moral obligation to prioritize progressive patients who respect science, read one tweet from 2021. Another post celebrated turning away a patient wearing patriotic clothing. "Sorry, we're all booked up for the next 6 months. Try the clinic across town." Resistance Doctor. The hospital's weekly staff meeting descended into chaos when Dr. Chen's supporters clashed with those demanding accountability. "You're all acting like political beliefs are protected characteristics," argued Dr. Lisa Wong, defending her colleague. "We have the right to create safe spaces for our marginalized patients." Nurse Wilson stood up, her voice steady but firm. "I've been a nurse for 25 years. Never once did I ask a patient who they voted for before checking their blood pressure. This isn't about safe spaces, it's about the fundamental ethics of medicine." Robert received calls from conservative medical professionals across the state sharing similar experiences. Dr. Thomas Baker, a surgeon from Springfield, described being passed over for promotions after his Republican Party registration became known. "They said I wasn't culturally aligned with the hospital's mission," he recalled. "Now I understand what that really meant." The hospital board discovered 3 previous complaints about political discrimination that had been buried by sympathetic administrators. These incidents were deliberately miscategorized as general patient dissatisfaction, Barbara Wells explained during an emergency meeting. "The pattern of cover-up is as concerning as the discrimination itself." Medical ethics experts began appearing on local news programs to discuss the broader implications. "When we start deciding who deserves care based on political ideology, we've abandoned the core principles of medicine," stated Dr. Richard Hampton, a bioethicist from State University. "The Hippocratic Oath doesn't have a political litmus test." Security footage continued to yield damaging evidence. One clip showed Dr. Chen coaching staff on how to identify and discourage conservative patients. "If you see American flag jewelry or religious symbols, tell them we're not accepting new patients," he instructed in the break room. "We need to maintain the right kind of practice environment." The investigation's momentum gained another devastating blow when Dr. Chen's personal laptop was submitted as evidence. IT forensics discovered emails between Dr. Chen and several colleagues discussing an informal system they called political triage. One particularly damaging exchange outlined their strategy. Conservative patients drain resources from those who actually support public health initiatives. Best to make them wait until they give up and go elsewhere. Dr. Martinez's team expanded their audit to include patient satisfaction surveys from the past 3 years. The data revealed a stark disparity. Conservative presenting patients reported significantly lower satisfaction scores and described feeling unwelcome or rushed through appointments. One survey comment read, "Doctor seemed more interested in my bumper stickers than my symptoms." The pressure began affecting hospital operations. Nurse Jennifer Kelly requested an immediate transfer, stating in her letter, "I cannot in good conscience continue working in an environment where political beliefs determine quality of care." 3 more nurses followed suit within days, creating a staffing crisis in Dr. Chen's department. Local medical equipment supplier Tom Bradford came forward with his own testimony. "Dr. Chen canceled our contract after seeing my Trump 2020 hat during a delivery," he explained to the board. He said he wouldn't support businesses that enable fascism. "We had worked with the clinic for 12 years prior without any issues." The hospital's legal department grew increasingly alarmed as insurance providers began their own investigations. This level of documented discrimination presents an unprecedented liability risk, warned Chief Counsel Margaret Walsh during an emergency meeting. "We're looking at potential class action exposure if more patients come forward." Medical students at State University organized a forum to discuss political bias in healthcare. Sarah Chen, no relation to Dr. Chen, led the discussion. "We take an oath to treat all patients equally. The moment we start qualifying that oath with political conditions, we've failed our profession." The State Medical Board expanded their investigation to include Dr. Chen's residency records. They discovered concerning patterns even during his training years. Dr. James Wilson, his former supervisor, provided documentation of incidents where Chen had made inappropriate political comments to patients. "I counseled him repeatedly about maintaining professional neutrality," Wilson stated. "He seemed to view medicine as a tool for political activism." Hospital security began reviewing months of surveillance footage, time-stamping every instance of suspicious patient interaction. Head of Security Mike Torres compiled a damning timeline. "We can see clear patterns of body language, delayed response times, and preferential treatment based on patient appearance and political indicators. It's all documented and time-stamped." Robert's case had sparked a broader examination of political discrimination in healthcare. Patient advocacy groups began collecting testimonies from conservatives who had experienced similar treatment at other facilities. The stories painted a troubling picture of systemic bias hiding behind medical authority. The mounting evidence sparked national attention as major news networks descended on Memorial Hospital. Fox News ran an exclusive segment titled "Healthcare Discrimination: When Politics Determines Treatment," featuring interviews with multiple patients who had experienced similar treatment. CNN's coverage focused on the broader implications, with medical ethics experts debating the intersection of political beliefs and healthcare access. Robert Thompson's quiet dignity in the face of discrimination resonated with viewers across the country. When asked to appear on Tucker Carlson Tonight, he declined, stating simply, "This isn't about media attention. It's about ensuring every patient receives equal care, regardless of their beliefs." The hospital administration's attempts to contain the situation backfired when internal emails leaked to the press. In one exchange, Chief of Medicine Dr. Sarah Williams had written, "Let's handle this quietly. We don't want to alienate our more progressive donors." The revelation forced the hospital board to schedule an emergency public meeting. Dr. Chen's social media history became a focal point as screenshots circulated showing years of inflammatory posts. "Another MAGA moron in the waiting room," read one from 2019. "Maybe they should try treating themselves with horse paste instead." The posts directly violated hospital policy, requiring staff to maintain professional neutrality on social platforms. Nurse practitioner Kevin Walsh, who had worked alongside Dr. Chen for 3 years, came forward with detailed notes documenting the doctor's behavior. He would make snide comments about patients' political beliefs during rounds, Walsh reported. Conservative patients consistently waited longer for pain medication. He claimed it was coincidence, but the pattern was clear. The State Medical Board expanded their investigation to include Dr. Chen's residency records from University Hospital. Former colleagues described similar incidents dating back to his training. He once refused to treat a patient wearing a Republican campaign shirt, recalled Dr. Patricia Martinez. He said his conscience wouldn't allow him to enable right-wing extremism. Local medical students organized a silent protest outside the hospital, wearing white coats with signs reading, "Medicine has no party," and "Heal all, judge none." Their presence highlighted the generational divide in healthcare, with younger professionals increasingly vocal about maintaining ethical standards. The hospital's insurance carriers demanded immediate action, warning that political discrimination could invalidate their coverage. "This represents an unacceptable liability," stated James Morrison, lead counsel for Medical Mutual. "Healthcare providers must demonstrate complete impartiality in treatment decisions." As pressure mounted, several medical associations prepared to release updated guidelines addressing political bias in healthcare. The American Medical Association fast-tracked a new section in their Code of Ethics specifically addressing discrimination based on political beliefs. Dr. Chen's case had become a catalyst for industry-wide reform, forcing healthcare institutions nationwide to confront their own implicit biases. The hospital board convened their emergency meeting in the main conference room, the tension palpable as Chairman William Foster called the session to order. Security footage played on the wall-mounted screen, showing Dr. Chen's confrontation with Robert Thompson in vivid detail. Board members shifted uncomfortably as they watched the doctor's dismissive behavior and heard his politically charged comments. "The evidence before us is deeply troubling," Foster announced, his voice grave. "Our internal audit has uncovered 7 additional complaints against Dr. Chen, all following a similar pattern." He distributed thick folders to each board member, containing documented instances of delayed care and discriminatory treatment toward conservative patients. Dr. Chen sat at the far end of the table, his posture rigid and defiant. "I maintain my right to exercise professional judgment," he insisted, though his voice wavered slightly. "These patients' political beliefs represent harmful ideologies that—" "That's exactly the problem," interrupted Dr. Maria Rodriguez, head of ethics. "Your personal political views have compromised your professional obligations. We've received statements from 3 nurses confirming that you regularly delayed care for patients wearing conservative messaging." Outside the conference room, local news crews gathered as protesters lined the sidewalks. One group held signs supporting Dr. Chen, claiming healthcare workers have rights too, while across the street, a larger crowd displayed banners reading "Equal Care for All" and "Politics Stops at the Hospital Door." The State Medical Association statement appeared on phones across the room. "Political discrimination in 5E. Healthcare delivery represents a fundamental violation of medical ethics. We strongly condemn any healthcare provider who allows personal political beliefs to influence treatment decisions." Dr. Chen's lawyer attempted damage control, but the evidence kept mounting. A nurse manager presented documentation showing conservative patients waited an average of 47 minutes longer for pain medication when under Dr. Chen's care. The hospital's legal team, led by Sandra Matthews, outlined the serious liability issues facing the institution. "We're looking at potential class action exposure," Matthews explained. "Our insurance carriers are threatening to withdraw coverage unless immediate action is taken." The pattern of discrimination is clear and documented. Several doctors from other departments attended the meeting, some wearing small American flag pins in quiet solidarity with Robert Thompson. Dr. James Wilson, a veteran surgeon, spoke up. "I've practiced medicine for 30 years. Never once have I asked a patient who they voted for before providing care. This behavior threatens everything we stand for as healers." The meeting reached a crescendo when Dr. Chen's residency supervisor from University Hospital joined via video call. "This isn't new behavior," she testified. "During his training, we had to counsel him repeatedly about making political comments to patients. He seemed unable to separate his personal views from his professional duties." As the evidence mounted, Hospital Administrator Sarah Williams finally addressed the elephant in the room. "Our attempt to handle this quietly was a mistake," she admitted. "We need clear policies preventing political discrimination, and we need them now. The integrity of our entire institution is at stake." Robert Thompson's evidence package landed on the boardroom table with a weighty thud. Inside, meticulously organized sections detailed every instance of Dr. Chen's discriminatory behavior. The security footage played again, this time from 3 different angles, showing Dr. Chen's confrontation with Thompson in stark detail. "As you can see," Thompson addressed the board, his voice steady and professional, "this wasn't an isolated incident. We have statements from 17 patients who experienced similar treatment after Dr. Chen noticed their political affiliations." He gestured to a thick stack of notarized testimonials. Dr. Chen's face reddened as nurse practitioner Jessica Martinez stepped forward. "I've documented multiple cases where Dr. Chen altered pain management protocols based on patients' perceived political leanings." She placed her own folder on the table. "Conservative identifying patients consistently received lower initial dosages and longer wait times for medication adjustments." The hospital administrator's face grew increasingly pale as she flipped through the mounting evidence. Charts, graphs, and statistical analyses painted a damning picture of systematic discrimination. A pattern emerged showing conservative patients waiting an average of 45 minutes longer for initial consultations, with their appointments averaging 7 minutes shorter than other patients. Dr. Chen suddenly stood up, his chair scraping against the floor. "This is a witch hunt. You're all playing into the hands of right-wing propaganda." His outburst drew shocked gasps from the board members. "Dr. Chen," Chairman Foster warned, "please control yourself." But Dr. Chen wasn't finished. He pointed an accusatory finger at Thompson. "Your MAGA culture is a disease in medicine. We have a responsibility to fight back against—" "That's enough." Dr. Rodriguez slammed her hand on the table. "This is exactly the kind of ideological bias we're addressing. Your personal political views have no place in patient care." Outside, the crowd of protesters had swelled, their chants echoing through the hospital's halls. Local news vans lined the street, their satellite dishes stretching skyward like metal trees. Social media exploded with hashtags both supporting and condemning Dr. Chen as the story gained national attention. 3 more doctors from different departments came forward, describing how they'd had to take over cases when patients complained about Dr. Chen's behavior. Each testimony added another brick to the wall of evidence, while Dr. Chen's defense crumbled under the weight of documentation. The hospital's legal counsel passed out copies of a preliminary report from the State Medical Board. "They're launching a broader investigation into political discrimination across all healthcare facilities," she explained. Dr. Chen's case has become a catalyst for examining systemic bias in medical treatment. Thompson stood quietly as the evidence mounted, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to Dr. Chen's increasing agitation. The board members exchanged knowing looks as they prepared to render their decision, aware that their ruling would set a precedent for healthcare providers nationwide. The hospital board's secretary hurriedly distributed copies of an urgent memo from the State Medical Licensing Authority. "We've just received word," she announced, "that similar complaints have surfaced at 3 other hospitals in the region." The revelation sent murmurs rippling through the boardroom. Dr. Chen slumped in his chair as Chairman Foster read aloud from the preliminary findings. "Statistical analysis shows a disturbing pattern of extended wait times, reduced pain management, and abbreviated consultations for patients displaying conservative political affiliations. He looked up gravely. This goes far beyond one doctor or one hospital. Thompson's phone buzzed continuously with notifications as the story gained traction on social media. Medical bias and healthcare equality dominated local trending topics. Outside, the crowd had grown to several hundred, their competing chants creating a cacophony that filtered through the hospital's walls. We've received statements from 42 additional patients since this morning, the hospital's legal counsel reported, spreading new documents across the table. Many have provided video evidence, text messages, and detailed accounts of discriminatory treatment. She paused, adjusting her glasses. The Civil Rights Division of the State Attorney's Office has contacted us about launching a formal investigation. Local news crews interviewed medical ethics experts on the sidewalk below. Dr. Patricia Williams, a renowned bioethicist, spoke firmly into a forest of microphones. Political discrimination in healthcare represents a fundamental violation of the Hippocratic Oath. We're looking at potential systemic issues that require immediate attention. The hospital administrator's phone rang. The American Medical Association is releasing a statement, she announced after a brief conversation. They're condemning political discrimination in healthcare and forming a task force to develop new guidelines. She looked directly at Dr. Chen. They're citing our case as the catalyst. 3 state legislators arrived, their presence adding gravity to the proceedings. We're drafting emergency legislation, Representative Johnson declared. Healthcare providers must be explicitly prohibited from discriminating based on political affiliation. Dr. Chen's attorney whispered urgently in his client's ear, but the doctor brushed him off. You're all overreacting. These people's beliefs actively harm public health. I was taking a stand. A stand that violated your oath and endangered patients, Thompson interjected calmly. The evidence shows you consistently undertreated pain, delayed critical procedures, and shortened examination times for patients you identified as conservatives. The hospital's risk management director stepped forward with more files. We've uncovered emails where Dr. Chen explicitly discussed screening patients based on political indicators. He instructed staff to check social media profiles and note any conservative affiliations in internal records. Security footage played on a large screen, showing multiple instances of Dr. Chen's confrontational behavior with patients wearing conservative-themed clothing or accessories. The timestamp data revealed a clear pattern stretching back months. The medical board has scheduled an emergency hearing for next week, Chairman Foster announced. Given the severity and scope of these findings, they're fast-tracking their review of Dr. Chen's medical license. Based on these findings, Chairman Foster declared, standing to address the packed medical board hearing room, we are prepared to make our final determination. The tension in the room was palpable as Robert Thompson sat calmly, hands folded on the table before him. Dr. Chen's attorney attempted one last intervention. My client's personal views should not. Your client's views directly impacted patient care, interrupted Dr. Williams, the board's senior member. The evidence is overwhelming and disturbing. She held up a thick folder of documentation. 47 confirmed cases of politically motivated care discrimination, altered medical records, documented instances of delayed treatment. This goes far beyond personal opinion. The board's verdict was unanimous. Dr. Chen's medical license was permanently revoked, making national headlines within hours. The hospital board immediately announced comprehensive reforms, including mandatory political neutrality training and new anti-discrimination protocols that would become known as the Thompson Protocol. Robert's calm persistence had sparked systemic change. Within months, medical schools nationwide incorporated political bias training into their ethics curriculum. State medical boards began reviewing their discrimination policies, and healthcare facilities across the country adopted similar protective measures. At a community dinner celebrating the changes, Robert spoke briefly about his experience. "This was never about politics," he said, his voice steady. "It was about ensuring every patient receives equal care, regardless of their beliefs. Today, that principle is stronger than ever." The local medical community's pledge to provide unbiased care inspired similar movements nationwide. Patient advocacy groups formed to monitor healthcare equality, and regular town halls became forums for open dialogue about medical discrimination. 1 year later, Robert stood before a graduating class of medical students, sharing his story as part of their ethics training. "Your duty is to heal," he told them, "not to judge. Remember that every patient who walks through your door deserves the same high standard of care." The Thompson Protocol became a model for healthcare facilities nationwide, its implementation a testament to how one person's principled stand against discrimination could create lasting positive change. Robert's methodical documentation and unwavering composure had transformed a single act of discrimination into a catalyst for reform, ensuring that political beliefs would never again determine the quality of medical care a patient received. As Robert left the podium that day, the sustained applause reflected more than appreciation for his speech. It celebrated a victory for medical ethics, professional integrity, and the fundamental right of every patient to receive unbiased care. His quiet resolve had helped heal not just a divided community, but the very profession dedicated to healing others.